Well, hi, good afternoon. Want to thank you for coming to the first ASMP and Canon Business Series webinar. I'm going to be talking more about this partnership in just a moment, and I'm going to be introducing more fully our guest today, Inti St. Clair, here in a second. I'm very happy to have her from Austin come and talk about licensing with me today. For those of you who don't know, my name's Thomas Madry. I'm ASMP's General Counsel and the managing member of Madry PLLC, a photography and art-based law firm here in Dallas, Texas. So you have two Texans, surprisingly, on one webinar today. Before we get started, I'm going to jump into a quick presentation just for about 5 or 6 minutes, tell you a few of the things that are coming up, tell you a few things that we're going to be talking about today, and then we're going to get right into it. First thing I will mention is please, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A box. That's the best way for us to see it so that we can answer it. And questions are most definitely encouraged. So please put that question right there in that Q&A box. If you put it in chat, we might see it, but we might not as well. So you definitely want to get it in there. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to go through a few things right here at the top, and then we're going to get to our discussion. All right, hope everyone can see that. If you can't, just tell me in the chat. I will keep an eye. People never mind telling me when something is broken, which I appreciate. So, as I mentioned, today we're going to talk about licensing and copyright with Inti St. Clair and myself. This is the first webinar in the Canon and ASMP business series. Very excited to have Canon on as a partner here. So, in case you you don't know who either of us are, Inti St. Clair is an Austin, Texas-based lifestyle and editorial portrait photographer. You should really check out her site. It's really well done and really interesting. Her work is amazing. That's intistclair.com. And I am ASMP's General Counsel. You can visit me at my website, which is madrypllc.com, for questions that you may have. Next month, though, we got our second ASMP and Canon webinar series, business series webinar, and that's going to be Pitching by Design with Jenna Thiessen and David Bergeron. It's going to be really great. I'm looking forward to it. October 16th at 3 p.m. Eastern. That's when the next one will be. And you're going to be seeing these every single month through this new partnership we have with Canon. Very excited. If you were part of our June workshops, you saw one of the new formats we have for learning and education. This is where we're doing 4 or 5 week classes where you meet every single week with an instructor and you really get to go deep into a certain area of photography. We're doing this again in October. Signups are open on the asmp.org website. You can sign up whether you're a member or a non-member. We'd really love to have you at some of these. So what we have is Taking the Intimidation Out of Video with David H. Wells, Fine Art Photography, the Art Market, Galleries, Museums, and Alternative Ways to Market and Sell Your Work with Thomas Werner, Working for Today, a workshop to keep you moving forward with AXS, long-term projects with Lou Jones, which I'm actually really excited to keep an eye on. And then if you want to really dive into copyright and licensing, I'm doing a 5-week class. We're going to meet for an hour and a half every week for 5 weeks. We're going to go over everything in copyright and licensing. We're going to go to the Copyright Office website. We're going to register works. We're going to spend time on fair use. We're going to talk about what to do if you're infringed. Think of today and some of these conversations as a great real-world example of how these underlying principles really matter. So we'd love to have you be part of our October workshops. As I mentioned, asmp.org, right there at the top of the page, you'll see October workshops. And the last thing before we get rolling, if you haven't seen ASMP's COVID-19 guides, you really need to check them out. There's two of them. About 6 weeks ago, we came out with ASMP's Health and Safety Guide for COVID-19, a protocol for visual creators. This was done as a collaborative effort between ASMP and Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel and his team of just incredible physicians and doctors and PhDs. And this goes in, it's a handbook on how do you work on set, on location in this time of the pandemic. Now, just a few weeks ago, we came out with the companion piece to this, and that's ASMP's Business and Legal Guide for COVID-19. This is one that I wrote entirely here with my attorneys at my firm, and this goes into all of the issues that you might face on the business and legal side. How do you develop policies? How do you work with your clients to include language in your contracts relevant to COVID-19? Inti and I may talk about this a little bit earlier. We were just talking before the webinar. Some clients feel one way, some clients feel another about including this language. Bottom line is you have to protect yourself. So the Health and Safety Guide for COVID-19 is available to anyone, members and non-members. The Business and Legal Guide is only available to ASMP members, but along with the Business and Legal Guide, we have a number of template documents behind in the members area where you're going to be able to download this document, adjust it to what you need, and use it in your jobs with your clients, and hopefully it will provide you a lot of assistance. If you haven't checked out these guides, you really should. Both of them, I think, are over 50 pages. It's a ton of information, and we're really, really proud of them. So last thing, our disclaimer, and I have to always come up with the disclaimer. Of course, I'm a lawyer. And so the webinar today is information and education only. This isn't legal advice that I'm going to be giving you today. You should definitely contact your personal attorney, the people who you work with, your professionals, to obtain advice for any problem you may be facing. Just because you're here and you participate, you ask a question, I answer a question, that doesn't mean we're in that attorney-client relationship. I wish it did. I wish all of you could be clients. I'd love to talk with you all day long. And of course, ASMP is not a law firm, doesn't provide legal services. The opinions that we're going to talk about insofar as they're legal are my opinions. And I know that Inti as well. She and we're going to give you our opinions about how this stuff works in our various worlds, but don't rely on either of us for this information. Pricing's different in every market, licensing different all over the place. But bottom line, get specific information for your specific circumstance. It's really, really critical. All right, let's stop all that and let's start talking about what we have coming up. So first, Inti, thank you so much for being here today. And why don't you take a second and kind of introduce yourself and tell everyone the type of work you do and everything else.
Thank you so much for having me. It's just such a pleasure to be a part of such a fantastic organization that supports photographers in the way that they do. And, you know, I love to support photographers as much as I can as well, and share whatever experiences I have, because I think that, you know, largely photography, you're kind of in your own little bubble and you only know what you know, and it's nice to create community and connect and help each other out. So I'm happy to be here to do that today. As Tom said, I am based in Austin, Texas. I would consider myself mostly a commercial advertising photographer, although I do some editorial work as well, so I can speak to that. I don't do anything when it comes to consumer photography. So if anybody's on here and asking questions about that, I'm afraid I won't be very much help, but I'll do what I can. So yeah, I mean, obviously, we have lots of things that Tom and I talked about beforehand, and we can go through some of those, but we would love any questions. We really want this to be as beneficial for those of you who are tuned in as we can.
I definitely echo that. Please add in your questions, put them in that Q&A box so that I can keep an eye on them. And we've already had a few come in, but I want to start kind of with a question that is on my mind, and that is, so Inti, when you're working with your clients and you're talking about issues related to licensing, has that changed in the last 5 or 10 years? What are you seeing? What's the current trend in what clients are wanting and what photographers are offering?
Yeah, it really has changed a lot, and I expect it to continue to. I think that this industry is constantly evolving and changing. And so what I can say, in the past was that there was much more of a, process that you went through with a client to get a certain amount of images, be that 1 or 5 or 10, and they were really like these key shots, and everything was really planned out beforehand. And that has really gone away. Not entirely, but my clients are now wanting lots of images in the same amount of time with the same amount of resources. Not every client wants an image library, but I have many, many clients who do. And that's really changed the conversation about pricing and about licensing and what that looks like. I think that images, individual images, unfortunately, have really lost a lot of market value. And there's a lot of reasons for that, be that just that now we're in this world where we're consuming images on a much greater scale in all different platforms. So it used to be, you'd have your billboard, you'd have your TV, you'd have your magazines, you'd have these things. And now it's just like so many different kinds of online platforms, websites, of course, but also banner ads as well as social media and things like that.
So,
sound isn't great.
Sure. And so, Inti, when you're talking to your clients, are there still clients out there that you work with that are looking for individual shots, those kind of just 1 or 2 off hero shots, or is it by and large people are looking for kind of everything you shoot in a day?
So usually the way it works, and hopefully you guys can hear me better. I'm sorry, I don't have a microphone. Usually they're not just looking for 1 or 2 shots. They're looking for quite a few more. But the pricing is usually a licensing up front for the usage of, say, 5 to 10 or even 20 images. But then I'm shooting this library that they have access to.
There's already been some questions that have been coming in, I think, related to what you're talking about. And so one of them is, do you offer different structures for bulk image delivery, or what's your approach for adjusting pricing for one-off images versus all those images? And what's your kind of cutoff for what is considered, where you adjust that pricing?
So I think that pricing is no longer based exclusively on an image. It's not about the actual image. It's more about the client, who the client is, and how they're going to use the image. So, for example, if I am doing the same shoot, with the same amount of talent and the same creative and whatever, I'm pricing it very differently if it's for a company that is a local Austin company and they're not marketing really outside of Austin, or if it's a company that's just marketing in Texas, or if it's a company that's marketing, in the US or globally. And so that's where the pricing really becomes incredibly different, if that makes sense. So it's less about the value of 1 image or 5 images, and more about how those images are going to be used and who is using them.
I think that leads into something that we see a lot at our firm. We obviously work with a number of photographers, and when I'm thinking about how you craft a license, really what I'm thinking about is the number of images as part of it, but the other 20 things that I'm worried about are usage issues. In what mediums are they going to be used? In what locations are they going to be used? And for what duration are they going to be used are some of the big ones. Now, some of you may know that I was a commercial photographer for about a decade before I went to law school, but that was quite a while ago. And when I was shooting, there was a big kind of the industry standard was that licenses were very term limited and had durations of, you know, sometimes 3, 5, 10 years, longer or shorter. But tell me, Inti, about how your clients are reacting to durational licenses. What are they looking for?
They don't want to mess with it at all. And that used to be something that was really huge in our industry. So you would do a shoot and you would license the picture for a year or 2 years, and then, you know, that license would come up and the company would come back because they wanted to continue to use the imagery, and therefore you could get extended use license. That happens now, but not very frequently. And so now pretty much any client, whether that's a small client or a big client, is wanting unlimited usage. And I think that there's a number of factors that play into that. The biggest one being that, especially in this world of digital, social media, et cetera, like, you're never going to ask them to take that picture down. So they're going to post it, and then it's up there, and it's kind of just going to be up there for forever. And that's what they would prefer, because then they don't have to deal with the hassle of it. Like, they don't want to track, they don't have to track imagery and track whether or not they can use it. So that's huge. And now everyone just wants unlimited. And I think that's part of it, that they just don't want to deal with it. But even other part of it is just that the people at these companies are changing jobs much quicker than ever before. And so they don't really have anyone on staff to even manage those usage licenses, because it's not like you're the only one creating imagery for them. They have, you know, hundreds of photo shoots going on every single year at these large companies, and they just really have no interest in trying to manage that. So now they're really expecting you to give them unlimited use. Now, there is a huge difference between unlimited non-exclusive use and unlimited copyright buyout exclusive use. And, you know, you charge accordingly for that, for sure. So if somebody wants copyright buyout, I mean, you're charging them a lot. And that really does kind of fall back into like a per image or a shoot basis, depending on who the client is.
I'm going to bounce off that for a second, because of course, copyright's kind of my whole world, right? And so, you know, a lot of times photographers come to me and they say, look, my client's asking for all the copyrights to everything. What should I do here? What are my options? And my advice is that almost always, and there are definitely large exceptions, but you want to try to steer away from copyright buyouts completely, and you want to work on a licensing which could be perpetual in duration, and it could allow them to use it in all these different mediums, and it could give them effectively the same thing as a copyright buyout. The difference is that you still own your copyright. And just as a little legal aside here, you know, when you take a picture, when you press that shutter, you are now the owner of your copyright. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to tell anyone. The minute you create that work, you own a copyright in your image. And owning that copyright gives you a certain set of rights, and those rights are exclusive to you. It's the right to reproduce, and the right to display, and the right to make derivative works, and there's the right to perform, and there's a number of other rights that are in there. Those are all yours, and they're yours the minute you press that shutter. If you sell or give your copyright away versus a license, then you don't have permission to do any of those things. And what we see a lot is that photographers will sell their copyright, and then they put it on their website and in their portfolio, and the client says, hey, I own this copyright, take it down. I'm the only one allowed to use it. And they call me and I say, yeah, you don't have the copyright anymore, right? So you really want to be careful about your copyright and protecting it. I think it's I think it is the biggest asset that every photographer has. You have thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of these, And for any given image, you have all those rights associated. So we always push for broader licensing language rather than selling or giving a copyright away.
100%. I mean, I can say truly, I've never sold the copyright to my picture.
No.
I've never sold copyright to a single picture. I have sold exclusive global usage for X amount of time, and made quite a pretty penny on that, but I have never sold my copyright. And I would certainly demand quite a lot for that. So, as I think everyone should.
Yeah, again, you can't get those rights back once you lose them, right? And one of the biggest rights that you have when you own a copyright is the right to bring a lawsuit. And which means that if you're infringed, then you're able to do something about it. If you sell that copyright and your image is infringed and used all over the world, that company is the only one that can pursue that. And a lot of times they don't care, right? So now your work is out of your control, and from the legal side, you're in a bad position.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Let me, one thing I want to mention, it's always a tricky subject to talk about pricing and talk about licensing. And there are a few things that we can do and a few things we can't do. One, both Inti and I are here in Texas. Pricing is different all over the country, right? And so it's very hard we're not going to be giving any prices on what things should cost or what they do cost. It really is market specific, and you need to kind of figure out that research. What we can say is that if you're giving greater usage in a greater variety of mediums, well, obviously that's more expensive to the client because they're getting more value out of it, right? And these are all things that are part of your negotiations. Now, one thing I read, a question here, it says, do you use length of time as a negotiation tool to be able to reduce the cost for the images? If not, where can you have flexibility? So Inti, maybe I'll ask it this way and say, there's a job, you write up an estimate, you send it in, and the client says, look, we'd love to work with you, but the price just isn't where we need it to be for whatever reason. What's your thought process when you're trying to, make that deal or get that job?
I mean, length of time for sure is, and I'm seeing some of these questions coming in, and I just want to reiterate that, I can't give you specific numbers here, especially about specific clients or specific jobs. But what I can say is that pricing is something that I personally feel has everything to do with the end client, who they are and how they are using the picture. And I think that that's really important to hone in on because, for example, say there's a local water company, like there's a local sparkling water company that came up in Texas, and they're just a startup. They're starting, they really haven't marketed nationally, they haven't even marketed locally, and they approach you and they want you to shoot their water, both in lifestyle situations and in other situations. And you're going to price that job for them differently than you would price that job for, say, a Topo Chico or a, what's Pellegrino or something like that. Like, think about it in those terms, in terms of how much is that brand going to get out of the imagery that you are creating for them. And so, when it comes to the imagery that you're creating on this set, and actually it could technically look exactly the same, right? Like you could have 3 talents for this job and 3 talent for that job, and your focus is this water and like whatever. Those factors can be the same, but your pricing is going to be extremely different based on who is using it and how they're using it. So I think that for me is super important. So I'm taking that into consideration at the point of submitting a bid, knowing that X company, Coca-Cola, is going to pay me way more than some local brand new tiny little company. And they should, right? They absolutely should. And sometimes I explain this to people, in the way that, like, think about Super Bowl advertising. We all understand, because, you know, we've seen it a million times, that people pay millions of dollars more to have their ad in the Super Bowl than they would to have it at any other time, even if it's the exact same ad. And that's super important. So you need to look at yourself when you're licensing your work in a similar fashion, if that makes sense.
I love that example. I always think about it in the same way. You know, a picture that you take, the exact same picture, if it's used in 1/4 of an internal web page, that is a different level of value to the company than a billboard on the freeway, right? And your work is what is providing the value to the company. And, you know, you thinking of value, thinking of the size of the company, thinking of you know, its reach and all of that. And that Super Bowl example, I think, is a great one. Let me switch up a few of one of the topics, and some of you may be very well versed in this, but Inti, can you talk a little bit about kind of the rights managed world and the royalty free world, and, you know, where are we falling with those type of phrases when we hear them today?
So, I mean, a lot of that terminology is, you know, connected with the stock photography industry, which I have a lot of experience in, actually. So, you know, the reality is rights managed was something that, you know, even 10 years ago was a pretty big deal. 15 for sure, 20 even more so, you know, and what that means is that where that image is being used and how it's being used is completely tracked. So that clients know if they are buying it, licensing an image, who else has used it and what it has been used for. And so they're paying premium to have that level of knowledge and security that once they license an image and they've paid X amount of dollars to use it in the way that they want to, that they know that it's sort of locking that image down for a specific amount of time for just them to be using it. So for example, if AT&T licensed a picture, they can, by paying extra money, be assured that T-Mobile, who's their major competitor, is not also going to use that same picture. And so, like, that's kind of what rights managed means. Rights managed, like it or not, in the last few years has pretty much gone away when it comes to stock photography. Companies can, if they want to, go on Getty or any other stock agency and pay and ask to buy out a picture for X amount of time or whatever, and they will pay for that. But that pricing structure is no longer even, like, listed. So that's something that's really interesting. So now most of the stock world is completely royalty free. And microstock, I feel, is also a royalty free image. So what that basically means is that once the person licenses the image, usually they're sold in terms of image size. So they're going to license, like, they're going to pay less if they really just, you want to use it on a website, as opposed to putting it on a billboard where they're going to pay more. But the reality is that those licenses grant them the ability to do whatever they want for whatever duration, and they're just paying for the difference in file size. And that also means that anyone else can go and license and use the image for whatever they want to as well. So that is something that really has evolved and changed over time. And I think that nearly every image is available for royalty free at this point. And the conversation about having something be rights to manage is generally initiated by the client right now.
And again, I feel like I'm dating myself, but back when I was shooting, stock was a real viable income stream. And my first job assisting was for a stock photographer who did lifestyle work, and she would shoot 4 times a year, and, you know, for about a week. And out of that week's shoot, she would give it to her editors at Getty or Corbis or wherever. And that was her income for the year, right? That was a viable business model, and that was prior to microstock and everything else, which I think has really changed that landscape. So I want to, at the top, you mentioned you do commercial work, you do editorial work. You know, a lot of ASMP members kind of have their foot in both camps, but some are only one or the other. Can you talk a little bit about the differences working with clients in kind of the pure business commercial advertising side and then on the editorial side?
Yeah, so I would say that I am a commercial photographer. How I market myself is to get commercial work. I certainly have done plenty of editorial work. I frankly really enjoy editorial work here and there because it feels a bit like a vacation. And I mean that in the sense that like there's usually very little control that they exert upon you when it comes to creating those images. I mean, obviously you want to please them and you're doing your best to have conversations about the article that's being put out to accompany your imagery and you know, really getting them what they want. But at the same time, you know, they're not telling you what to shoot. They're giving you a lot of creative freedom, but they're also not really paying you very much. So much like, you know, it's very difficult these days to make a real living just being a stock photographer. I think it's also extremely challenging to just be an editorial photographer. The price points are just so much lower. So, you know, mostly my world is commercial, and, you know, commercial is a lot more of dealing with clients and having, you know, doing all this creative ahead of time to really make the clients happy and understanding all the ways in which they're going to use pictures. You know, I find that now when I'm on set and I'm creating images, in my head I have layouts and I have cropping and I have all of these things that are, you know, of course I'm trying to get the moment and the light right and all these things, but really end usage for clients is super important these days. And you know, there used to be just a couple of uses and now there's so many. And a lot of times they're wanting to take that one picture and crop it square for Instagram and make it into a story and make it into a banner like this or a banner like this or a billboard. And so like all of those things are really important. So I think that, you know, I love being a commercial photographer and it's much more challenging in many ways, but it also, you get paid better for it. So there's that.
Good. So I want to hop to some questions. We've got a few here, and these questions kind of zig and zag between stuff we've already talked about and some new things. And I'm sure Inti and I will go off in other directions as well. Question here from James. If they buy out a certain amount of images, can you still post some of the others that weren't included in what you delivered? I think of this when photographing celebrities and notable people. And I think what we're asking here is you deliver your work to a client, the client is done, but you have other photographs that you've created during that shoot. Can you post them on your on your social media, on your website, in your portfolio? I have a legal answer, but Inti, have you run into situations where the client selects are different from the ones that you want to work with, and how do you deal with that?
I run into that all the time, to be honest. And so usually, based on the contract that we have laid out, there is a period of time in which I am not allowed to show the imagery because the client would like to put that imagery out into the world first. Completely understood, totally get it. This also happens in the editorial world, so it's not like this is an atypical thing. So, but the reality is that I own the copyright for every single picture that I have taken. And if I love this picture that they did not select, I have every right to take that picture and put it on social media and put it on my website and put it in my portfolio book or whatever. And I can absolutely choose that it can be one of the images that they selected, but it can also just be my favorite. And sometimes those are not the same because a client is selecting an image based on a whole different set of rules that have to do with how they're going to use it. And I'm just picking the picture that I love the best. But definitely, like, you have to honor your contract because you could get in very big trouble if you don't do that. So, you know, most of my commercial clients, I'm not even allowed to post on social media that I'm shooting for them. I mean, not even that I'm shooting for them, much less share the content that I'm creating. So yeah, it's very, that's the deal. Would you agree? Does that seem accurate to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always break it down into their legal decisions and business decisions, right?
Yeah.
Legally, you're exactly right. You own that copyright from the minute you take the picture, and you have the rights in it. Now, your contract may constrict those rights in some way. I remember photographing for a company here in Texas that worked in the oil industry, and everything was proprietary, and it was for an annual report that no one could see, right? And so even though I owned all of the copyrights, my contract said I wasn't able to do X, Y, and Z with the images, and that made sense. And so, you know, there's a balance between what you naturally own and what your contracts say. Now, there's even a bigger question to me, and this is something I run into, which is, you know, even if it's not written in the contract, Inti, and you want to use it anyway, and you're worried it might kind of piss off your client, I mean, do things like that come in to your mind in terms of keeping ongoing business and keeping client relationships good?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think that's just about knowing your client, right? I mean, look, most clients are 100% comfortable with you using your work to promote yourself, but many are not, right? But that is really a conversation that is had at the upfront when you're being hired to do a job. It's, you know, definitely like if you do any work in pharma, for example, pharma is super restrictive, like crazy. Like I do pharma and I sign all kinds of NDAs. I'm not even allowed to say I ever worked for the company, much less ever show the imagery, right? But they pay you a pretty penny for it. So, yeah.
So jumping around a little bit, a question from Steve, and Steve saying he doesn't need specific numbers here, which is good because we're not going to give them. He's just wondering about the structure of licensing. If it's not if it's not a per image cost, how would it be approached? Is it up to 20 images delivered, up to 50 images, up to whatever? How, just roughly, how are you breaking down the licensing discussion we had earlier?
So usually when a client approaches me asking about, will you do this shoot? This is what we want, et cetera, we are asking them up front how many images they would like to have. And usually they are giving us a range. And I say us because I have a rep, sorry. But regardless, usually they're giving a range. And so they're saying, we need 10 images, but, ideally we'd like access to the library, blah, blah, blah. So my pricing structure is based on a creative day rate. You can call it a day rate, you can call it a creative fee, whatever. So that's my rate. And then beyond that, I'm charging and I'm putting in there, license usage for X amount of time, blah, 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 for up to X amount of images. So say they tell me 10 images. Great. So that's already built in. So then oftentimes I will also have another line that says additional images may be licensed for X dollars. So you're outlining that as well. And then I also, of course, have my retouching fees in there and things like that as well. So I hope that's helpful. That's generally how my rep may structure things. There are cases where I do an image library. And in that case, often they don't want to pay me for retouching, or maybe they come back later and say, hey, we'd love to see, your top favorites and we want you to retouch, X amount. But sometimes they are literally saying, we want the hard drive, walk away from the day of the shoot, done. And they're not having me retouch any, they're not having me go through the pictures, they're not having me do anything. And obviously that is being priced differently because they literally are walking away with a hard drive of every single raw frame that I have captured on that set.
And when photographers come to me and they, say, can you believe I was asked to do this? And it's that kind of situation. I say, look, you're in business, you're a professional. If they're going to pay for it and that's a good business deal for you, that's business. This is your job, right? And so sometimes those jobs can be really lucrative. And I think the thing is too, is that is becoming so much more common. So if you say no to that, that is 100% a business decision that you can make for yourself. Someone else is going to do it. The client isn't going to magically decide, oh, we don't want to do it that way. Never mind, we'll just take 10 pictures. That's not how it works. So one follow-up question here, and it's something I hear a lot, which is you get a call from a potential client, or you're bidding on a job, and it's for a nonprofit, a small group, someone who is looking to really not pay much. And how do you mentioned earlier, you think about the client when you're thinking about your pricing and where they are in their business life cycle. How do you deal with nonprofits and places looking for you to shoot for minimal amounts of money?
It depends on the nonprofit. I mean, certainly I've done shoots for free for those organizations because I want to support them. You know, and you can get a you know, a tax write-off generated based on what you would charge for that, and that's, you know, somewhat helpful when it comes to tax time. But I think that's just, when it comes to that, that's just really a personal decision for sure.
So tell me, here's something I've seen a lot in contracts in the last few years, and maybe you've seen this too. The question is how to realistically rephrase the indemnification clause in most licensing contracts. And I want to broaden this and look at it in two ways, Inti. First, you know, there's often a clause which says, you know, you'll indemnify us if you do something bad, and then you might have a mutual indemnification clause, you know, talking about copyrights and usage and things like that. But we're seeing a lot of indemnification clauses related to COVID-19. So when you're looking over a contract, or you're thinking about indemnification in terms of, you know, usage and licensing and shooting, what are you looking at? What are you thinking about?
Oh gosh, the COVID thing, the COVID thing is a whole deal right now. And I think, you know, ASMP has amazing resources for it. I think it's super important to be really cautious about that. And, you know, I mean, I can say that I have clients who, big name, nationally, perhaps internationally recognized name clients, one that absolutely 100% is so concerned about COVID that they want to try and do a shoot that's completely distanced, meaning including me not even in the same room as my talent. And like, that's a huge deal for them because of COVID specifically. Like, their legal team does not want to take any risks, right? In contrast, you know, another client that literally asked my rep and I to take any reference of COVID completely out of our estimate, of our everything. And I was like, absolutely not. Because what they are looking to do is pass the buck on to you should something happen, should someone get COVID and they think it was on set, and you would therefore could potentially be held liable for a major lawsuit if somebody dies, et cetera, et cetera. So like, you know, I do have to say that in the past, I wasn't so worried about that type of stuff. I mean, I do have insurance, like errors and omissions insurance, and I have different things like that safeguard me, but this COVID thing is a whole nother bag. So like,
yeah,
you gotta really be smart.
It's a whole nother thing. Even for lawyers, we don't really know how this is going to shake out. The first lawsuits about this haven't really been you know, been adjudicated yet. And so, you know, I see contracts where clients are crossing out all the COVID information. And then I see contracts where clients are saying, if anyone on set gets sick, you indemnify us. It's not our fault. It's all your fault, kind of thing. You don't want to sign that. It almost doesn't matter how good the client is right now, because you don't want to be on the hook for something like that. So jumping to a totally different question, is PhotoQuote or PhotoShelter's version of it at all relevant anymore for small to medium-sized businesses and organizations as a starting place when you're thinking about pricing?
I'm gonna say I think so. I don't use either one of those, so I can't say specifically, but I do think that other people use them, and I think that it's good. You know, oftentimes when people come to me asking me a question, you know, I can only give the experience that I personally have. A lot of times I will also send them to like Getty, for example, and say, price this licensing out on there as if a client were going to pay for this picture on there. That's a really useful tool. Look, Getty licenses more images every day than anybody else, but you could also go to Adobe or Photoshop or Shutterstock or like any of these other sites. I think those are all super helpful places. Another amazing resource, I think, for pricing specifically for actual like assignment work is Wonderful Machine. So if none of you guys if you've never heard of that, they have a blog. They literally share actual jobs with all of the pertinent information blacked out, and they talk about the negotiation and the pricing for that job. And it will show you everything from the photographer fee, the usage fee, you know, crew, like everything. And I think that that's incredibly useful resource that I use all the time myself.
I'm a big fan of Wonderful Machine. Bill Kramer up there and I have had a number of great conversations lately, and we're trying to bring some interesting programming this fall maybe with them. So having a good time. So building off something you just said, here's a question. So you have two separate charges for clients, one for shooting the job and another for usage. Is that?
Typically, yes, but again, it depends on the client. So if a client is hiring me for a library shoot and they are going to walk away with unlimited usage, usually it's all baked into one. So it just depends, but typically it's separate.
And sometimes, you know, it's about what the client wants to see and what they're comfortable with, and it can be the exact same number, just broken down in a couple of different ways, right?
And sometimes they'll come back to you, the agency or the client will come back to you and say, can you separate these out? Can you do this? And a lot of that has to do with the cost consultants and whatever. So I think that what really helps you, look, I and my rep, we both ask many times about budget. Every client that comes our way, we're asking at the beginning and the conversation's continuing and we're asking again, and we're just trying to glean as much information out of them as we can to know what they're looking at and where you can fit that in. And sometimes they don't ever tell you anything and you just throw it out there and hope for the best. But don't be afraid to ask. It's really important.
A few more questions here, and thank you all for all the questions. This has been great. I hope you're enjoying the conversation today. I've already learned a lot. I'm excited. So here's a question. What I often run into are medium-sized clients who intend the images for a particular use, but require or are required by their legal department to have unlimited use. So talk about the conversation negotiations you have. And I think you've addressed this a few times, but let me frame it maybe just a touch differently and say a client comes to you and says, hey, I really just need these headshots for my website. And you look at the client and you evaluate what the pricing will be. And then you're in the middle of negotiations and they say, oh, and I need unlimited use for everything all over the world forever and ever. How do you approach that with your client?
I mean, I get the unlimited use. I try to know from the beginning before I ever put an estimate together what usage they want. So it's pretty rare that I've never really had anyone come back and say that they want to all of a sudden change that. If it happens, we raise our rates. I mean, that's how it goes. They don't get it for the same amount. I think this unlimited use thing is becoming so much more common. And I think that, a lot of times I'm really evaluating as well, how long are they really going to use this picture? Like, how often is this client generating new content and pushing out new content? The reality, I think these days especially, is that they're never going to use your picture unlimited, especially if it's a portrait of somebody. Come on now. Like, and the value of a portrait is really not that big a deal. And like, if you're shooting for a massive company, they're going to be changing their advertising again really soon. So the likelihood of them actually using that picture indefinitely is just not, it's not happening. It's just
right.
not. And I think that, I hate to say this because I'm old enough to have been in the old guard and understand that it used to be so great that you could get all these licensing, whatever. It's just not, it's not the industry anymore. It's just not. And so you kind of just got to let it go a little bit, I think, and be okay with it if you want the job.
Well, I think that's the bottom line is if you want the job. So quick clarification question, and I'm going to see if I can answer this, and then Inti, you let me know if I nailed it. question was about royalty-free. Well, if you have a royalty-free image, the client pays a licensing fee, so why is that not considered a royalty? And so I think the name royalty-free may be a little confusing, but essentially the client pays once and can use it for whatever they want, and they're not ongoing royalties or ongoing payments like you would have with a limited duration license. Am I on point?
That's exactly what I would say. So this whole licensing thing used to be, if it were rights managed, the license would be for a specific duration, for a specific, reach or whatever, and then they would have to re-up it. Whereas royalty-free means you license it once, done. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to do anything. It's just a free license for you to do whatever you want with that picture.
I want to revisit one more thing, and it was we actually got a few comments and questions about this, and I will preface this by saying that neither Inti nor I are tax professionals, and nothing we say is tax advice. The question was about maybe getting a write-off when you shoot some nonprofit stuff. I'm going to nip that in the bud and say talk to your accountant. That's what they're there for. I can't help you with that. What?
They're not wrong. It really doesn't. It doesn't bode well. I think, yeah, it's not going to get you very much. You're basically just volunteering.
Yeah. There are a lot of rules. And one of the things you might, if you were sitting in my office and I was talking to clients every single day, I might say, now I'm not an attorney, or I'm not a tax attorney or an accountant, right? That's not my world. So get professional help there. That's the best advice. That is the official advice of ASMP.
I agree with that. And usually when I volunteer my photography, I volunteer it. I don't expect to get anything back. That's my choice.
So really interesting question here, and one I've seen a few times over the last few years. I'm an architectural photographer, and often in addition to the architecture firm, there are other parties interested in the images. Any suggestions or best practices on how to handle multi-party contracts or similar situations? So I definitely have thoughts from the legal side, but Inti, have you been in situations where it's not just you and the client, there's you and the client and maybe another user or multi-parties?
So I think that this question, I know plenty of architectural photographers. This is very big in the architectural world because like a single client may not pay you that much for the use of the picture, but you definitely will make additional money by licensing it to be in a magazine or licensing it to the interior designer or on and on and on. So I think that is huge in that world. It doesn't happen that much in my world, but it's a very big deal. I think it also happens in the world where you're photographing celebrities, musicians, singers, even corporate celebrities, Bill Gates, like whatever. So again, all of this comes down to how your contract is structured from the beginning. And I personally never allow third-party usage. So basically I'm saying that this contract and what you're paying me is for you to use, but you do not have permission to sell it to anybody else or give anyone else permission to use the picture. This negotiation is between you and I, and that's what you get to use it as. And if the interior designer goes to the architect, it is their obligation to refer them to you. And if they give those pictures away, that's illegal.
I could not echo that more, and I want to tie this back to something we talked about at the very beginning. If you don't have your copyright, you can't tell them to stop. And you can't make demands like this is only for your use. If you sell your copyright, they can sell it to anyone they want to. They can sell it to a t-shirt company, and now your image is everywhere in the world on t-shirts, And so definitely limiting third-party use. And in the law and contracts, you'll often see things called assignment and transfer, right? So this is where you can assign your rights under a contract to someone else, or you can transfer your rights to someone else. And whenever you see that language, assignment and transfer, on one of your contracts that has license information in it, you want to be really careful. Because, if you have a company, you work with a client, they are bought up by a bigger company. You know, I run into this almost every week. Well, can that bigger company now use this? Well, what do these provisions say, right? What if they go bankrupt? If a company goes bankrupt, the copyrights and other intellectual property can be auctioned off. Your work can be auctioned off in certain ways. Those contracts can be auctioned off. And so you really want to have tight contracts about this stuff to make sure that none of that happens. Good question.
Yeah, great question.
Okay. So I will grab one here and do a little legal geekery for a moment. The question is, what's the relationship between a release and a copyright, i.e. can a model release ever claim copyright? So we're looking at different sets of rights, okay? When we talk about a copyright, we're talking about the right to reproduce and display and distribute and perform and make derivative works and all that, okay? And so you own the right to do all that. But your talent, a talent release, a model release, is talking about different sets of rights. They're talking about rights of publicity, rights of privacy. Mainly rights of publicity is what we think about with the model release, which essentially says you can use my name and likeness in this image for these purposes, XYZ, right? Now, could you have a situation where you own the copyright, which means you're the only one allowed to reproduce and display it, and you don't have a model release, and so the person in the image says, no, you can't use it because now you're using my name and likeness and invading my right of publicity. Yes, then you can't really use it and they can't use it. And now you're stuck in a situation where almost invariably someone's going to call a lawyer. And that's no good for anyone, right? So a lot of times in our contracts that we write for our photography clients, there'll be language about talent. There'll be language about rights of publicity, rights of privacy issues. And in your releases with your talent, you want to address copyright. For example, are you going to allow the talent to use these images in their portfolios? Well, you need to grant them a license to do so. If you don't have anything about that, then they don't really have the right to do it. Sometimes you want to include that, sometimes you don't. Sometimes that's involved in the pricing. It gets more complex when you're dealing with talent agencies. Inti, do you want to talk at all about that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't say that, look, if I'm self-producing a shoot, for example, I mean, I'm using a standard release that Getty puts out that basically lets me do whatever I want with that picture. Now, mind you, I'm not like shy about that. I talk to my models beforehand and I make sure that they're cool with it and that they understand that release, because I don't ever want to be involved with the lawsuit that someone I took a picture of. I just don't, I'm very risk adverse and I'm not into that at all. So that's definitely something that I avoid. What was the other part? I think there was something else I was going to say, but I
talent agencies versus just individuals.
Yeah, so a lot of times a talent, when you are hiring a talent from an agency, you are calling them and giving them the exact specifics of licensing for those images. So they know as well, when they're signing up to do the job, who's using the picture, for how long, what kind of exclusivity. And you know, pharma is, again, this industry that really wants to control everything. So sometimes we're having to call the talent agency and say, we need talent that not only has never modeled for another competing company for this type of medication or a list of medications or whatever, but also that they're going to sign a release that says that they will not, for X amount of time, take another job for a competing brand. And they're paying through the nose for that, right? Because just like they're paying for exclusivity for your image, they are also paying for exclusivity for that person's likeness. So those are things that I have definitely dealt with, for sure.
So bottom line on this is that photographers almost always talk about copyright, and that's good, and I like that. And the next question is on copyright. Remember, there's a lot of other rights involved, and this is where I always tell photographers, almost no matter what size you are, you want to have a relationship with an attorney and an accountant. And I'm not talking about having someone on retainer where, you know, you paying them every month, but just someone to call, right? And if you're an ASMP member, my only correction to anything Inti's saying is that, boy, ASMP has a really good model release that you might want to use instead of Getty's. I don't know. All right. So the next question I have on here is one I'll probably answer pretty quickly, but it's, can you discuss getting copyright through the U.S. Copyright Office? I've had situations where lawyers won't help because it's not officially copyrighted. Okay, so I'm going to answer this in two ways. I'm going to give you a brief answer, and then I'm going to tell you that you should check out some of the resources at ASMP, and I'm also going to have a very shameless plug for my upcoming workshop. When you take a picture, it is copyrighted. You own the copyright 100%, full stop. You don't have to do anything. It is yours. But if you want to ever pursue something in a lawsuit, your copyright has to be registered. That's different from owning the copyright. You own it, but registering it is an affirmative action that you have to take with the Copyright Office. And photographers can register up to 750 images on one application for $55. Why have lawyers said they can't get involved because it's not been registered? The reason is that if you register it properly in the right time frame, then you're eligible in court for what are known as statutory damages. Statutory damages award you money even if you've not been hurt actually, or the person hasn't made any actual money. Those are called actual damages, right? But statutory damages, if you register your work timely, can be up to $150,000 per image per infringement, right? So there are a number of reasons to register timely. And what is timely? It has to be before the image is, quote, published, or within 3 months of first publication if the infringement occurred in a certain time period. You heard me go very fast over the last sentence, which I have given multi-week workshops on, literally just published versus unpublished. It's very complex. And it is critical that you register your work, but I want you to remember one thing about what I just said, and that is you kind of have this 3-month window after first publication. When I hear 3 months, what I think is 4 times a year. If you always registered your work every 3 months, no matter what, you would always be protected in your ability to pursue statutory damages. If you want to know about all this and much, 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 much more, love for you to come join me for my 5-week workshop that's starting on October 22nd. We're going to get into all of this in incredible detail, and I think every photographer would benefit from it. It's limited. I think we're limiting this one to 25 or so. And so you really get to ask and get your questions answered. So join me there for that one.
Definitely join him. I do have one quick question, which you can choose not to answer right now.
Go for it.
If you haven't registered something within that 3-month window, can you still register it at any point in time?
Yes. If you can register images at any point, including, you know, I just worked with a photographer who was in his mid-80s, and we registered stuff that he took in his 20s. No problem, right? But if you don't register before your work is infringed, or within 3 months of first publication, you're limited to actual damages. And in most cases, actual damages are very hard to prove and kind of small, which is why lawyers won't often take those cases, because the average copyright case right now lasts for 3 years and costs $300,000 or more at a minimum. So if you haven't registered your work properly, it's very hard to find a lawyer who will take that case if there are not actual damages. But yes, you can always go back and register any work, even outside of that 3-month window.
Thank you.
Okay. We're just going to do 1 or 2 more. And thank you all for coming. I hope you really enjoyed it. We'd love your feedback. We want to specifically thank Canon for the first ASMP and Canon Business Series workshop. I think we should, this is an interesting question to me, and I'm interested in your opinion. Have you been approached by clients becoming aware of pricing differences, large company versus small companies, et cetera? People don't seem to understand and may think it's unfair to charge differently. Also, is charging an hourly rate smart or not smart? Let's really look at that first part. How do you explain if a client has ever approached you about, hey, I heard you did this shoot down the way. It's the exact same number of hours and days, but you charge us a lot more. Has that come up?
Variations of that, sure. And I think that I just go back to explaining it, whether I use my, Super Bowl analogy or like whatever, right? You really have to break it down for them so that they understand how valuable that work is to them because of the reach that imagery is getting them. What's the return on the marketing for them, for their company? And I've certainly had to have those conversations. I can't tell you exactly what I said because I usually just go for it. but I do think that in general, I get them to understand and look, if I'm too expensive, I'm just too expensive and they're going to go somewhere else. And that means that they're not my client, and that's okay. Don't charge an hourly rate in commercial photography, please. It's way, way, way different than consumer retail photography.
I love that you said that. So let me ask, let me kind of end with this and say, Inti, any message to the participants, the commercial photographers out there, ASMP members, about anything we discussed?
Oh my gosh, probably so many. I mean, I really understand how everyone wants, like actual numbers. And I think, again, if you missed my reference to Wonderful Machine, that's a way to get some actual numbers. But truly, I think relying on making photography friends and get yourself a mentor, get yourself a photographer who's farther along in their career. I know that I personally and my photographer friends, we call each other, we help each other out, and you can do that. We can't do that in this forum because that's price fixing, but we can do that with our friends and have those conversations. And I think that, I know that me personally, if you called me and wanted my help on a specific job, I would help you because I don't want to devalue this industry any more than it already has been over the years. And I want to help you and your work get the money that it deserves.
I echo that. I think that's one of the great benefits of ASMP is being able to reach out and meet photographers in your area and across the country and get some of this get some of that advice. I'll wrap up by answering one question I saw and then a little note, and that is if you on those 5-week workshops, yeah, those are recorded, and so if you can't make one day, no big deal. Sign up for the workshop. You'll be able to watch the recordings, and that is a benefit to you. I did a 5-week workshop on contracts back in June, and I'm still working with the participants there, and they're watching videos, so a lot of fun. I want to thank everyone for coming today. I want to thank Canon again. I know that we weren't able to get to all the questions, but come to the next one. Come to some of our workshops. We really appreciate you attending from all of us here at ASMP, and thank you, Inti, so much for joining us, and we'll see y'all soon.
Thank you all so much.